Hi guys, Faxi here from Ocean Swift Synthesis. I'd like to show you in this video some more modular patches from our TH3 bundle. This pack comes with some distortion patches, which you can see in another video, and with ring modulator patches and with talkbox patches. So we'll look at the ring modulators and the talkboxes in this video. So basically what you have here is Modular 4 patches for the scope platform, and they are mono effects. And we kind of took the ideas of a ring modulator and kind of went a little bit crazy with them. Basically this is the fun with modular, right? To go a little bit crazy. As you can see, everything in the patches is clearly labeled. You can use it with or without the wires basically, because you can really everything is kind of straightforward and you can see how it's going. The signal flow is from the top through the left side, and then back to the right side, and from the bottom to the top. Each patch also has a multi-effects as an insert slot in the last thing in the synthesis chain over here, which you can use or not use depending on your preferences. You can stick additional effects on top of the patches over here if you want to maybe compress stuff like that you want to keep with your presets. So speaking of presets, each one of these patches comes with quite a number of presets. For example, the Ringer Classic, which we're looking at over here, comes with 38 presets, which is pretty cool. So the idea here was kind of to get pretty gnarly and pretty strange and cool sounds out of the TH3 TH3 Acid and TH3 Beast synths. But you can use it basically, of course, with any synth or any sound you want to affect. So what is going on in the Ringer Classic patch? So the sound comes in into a ring modulator, and the first source, the ring modulator has two sources. The first source is, like we said, the incoming sound, and the second source is a built-in oscillator. Now, looking at this oscillator, as you can see, it's a multi-mode OSC, with 5 wave shapes. It sounds maybe usually, not always, but oftentimes it sounds cool with a sine wave as the setting, but we've used the multi-osc just to make more options available, a bigger sonic palette. You can use whatever shape you want, of course. And the key here is the OSC is being pitch modulated, and for this you have two separate LFOs. Over here, the ring OSC pitch LFO A and LFO B. And as you can see, they are synced to BPM. You can choose the BPM over here and then the clock division over here for each one of the LFOs. And you can also re-trigger the LFOs. If you connect MIDI to this patch, you can use it to re-trigger the LFOs on each new MIDI note if you want to. And something interesting here is that this LFO type can be modulated itself as well. So you have two additional LFOs here on the bottom, which are labeled as mod LFOs. And what they basically do is they modulate the pitch LFOs. Both of them do it. So you have two inputs on each of these big LFOs, and they correspond to each of these mod LFOs. Sorry for the confusion over here, because I just feel like I've said LFOs a lot during the last 2 minutes. So that's for the LFOs. And as we said, they're synced to BPM and all that. So you have a pretty full-fledged OSC over here. And as we saw over here, the patch is also connected to MIDI. So you can be using MIDI notes, whether they are the same notes as the synth that you're inputting into the other section, or completely different MIDI channel is up to you. Or you can also use a constant frequency as the base frequency for the oscillator that is ring modulating with the incoming audio. Here you have a choice, so it's either it's either constant or MIDI. If it's on the first position over here, then the pitch source for the OSC will be this constant frequency module over here. And this is pretty cool if you actually go. It's somewhat useless on higher settings, but this is really cool on low to mid settings. On low settings, you can pretty much get almost like a tremolo sound, and on higher settings you can get a sort of, not higher, but on higher low settings, let's call it, you can get interesting effects and sometimes like a distorted sound and really interesting stuff. So just pretty much, yeah, try it out. After the ring modulator itself, you continue with a crossfade between the original sound and the ring modulated sound. So if it's all the way on the left position over here, then the patch is pretty much bypassed up to this point. You'll only be hearing from this module the output from the original sound. Now as you start to mix over to the right, you will hear the result of the ring modulated sound, with the second position being purely the ring modulated sound with no dry signal. So it's kind of up to you how you want to mix the sounds. And then, so up to here, even on dry, it doesn't mean that the whole patch is dry. It's only up to here, because after the mix, we actually have two more things going on. We have a distortion module, and we use the pulsifier over here. It just gives a bit more roundness to the tone, bigger tone, kind of fattening up the tone on mild settings, let's say like this, or up to the middle setting, and then gets a little bit more aggressive on the top third and gets completely aggressive with the last few ticks. So this is a pretty useful distortion module, and it works well in synergy with the modules that come before it. The last thing we did is just add a high pass to this thing. If you use the ring modulators, kind of produces sometimes all sorts of frequencies, right? And all sorts of weird stuff can go on with the ring modulation. So if you want to take off a little bit from the low end as to not really have, I don't know, if you're doing like crazy effects, you know, and you don't want a dirty low end, then you can just get rid of it by using the 60 dB high pass filter over here. And you can of course also bypass the filter if you would like. So this is the Ringer Classic. It already, like we said, it comes with a bunch of presets, and it's already pretty crazy like this. But we also have something that we call the Ringer Craze, which is just pretty much the same basic idea, but just goes insane with a lot of LFOs. And yeah, it just looks basically crazy because of all these wires. But a lot of these wires are, for example, you know, the gate connection for each of these LFOs, and it's kind of redundant stuff. But you have an LFO for each function that can be modulated in this patch, so it manifests itself in a total of 8 LFOs. So the same, just want to show the same idea of having mod LFOs that are modulating. These are main LFOs that are actually modulating parameters, okay, the top 4 ones. And then these ones are just modulating the LFOs themselves. So we don't need to get into all of that again. We saw it on the previous patch, but just showing you that these 4 and then these 4, okay? And again, they're synced to BPM, and you really clearly, of course, you can also see which divider is going to each LFO by just looking at the notes patch over on the top. So the patch itself. So incoming audio and the same type of oscillator sound is being remodulated. Now the difference here, before we get into all the other stuff, the main difference here is that the OSC that is being used as a ring modulator source is a wavetable OSC. So you have a ton of shapes over here, and this can get really, really interesting by just using various shapes on the wavetable OSC. Gives you a much more richer palette as a source for the ring modulation. So again, you can choose if you want the frequency for this oscillator to come via MIDI or via the constant frequency. We talked about all this before. And now something a little bit different than the previous patch is happening. While the previous patch, the OSC and the incoming audio went straight into a ring modulator, here they are first going into amplitude modulators, which are basically tremolos, okay? Tremolos, but they're separate tremolos. There's one tremolo for the input signal and one tremolo for the ring modulator source signal. And then you have tremolo LFOs, which can be, again, synced to BPM and re-triggered. This is, I guess, kind of important to mention because it means like the whole tremolo kind of sequence that you set up will be synced to your BPM. With each new MIDI note, it will restart and be correctly placing. You know, if it's 1/16th, it will correctly place the tremolo LFO kind of sequence correctly on the beats and bars of your DAW, basically, is what I'm trying to say. So, you get a tremolo and a modulated tremolo, and it can also serve as a volume attenuator because if you have, let's say you have no tremolo turned on, when the offset is turned off, these oscs, this this osc or the input signal is turned off. Now, taking into consideration that being a ring modulator, to get sound out of the ring modulator itself, both of these need to be above a 0 setting. You can't have one of them turned off because then the ring modulator circuit will be broken and you won't hear anything coming out of the ring modulator. But you can attenuate the volume of one of the sounds, and of course it affects how the ring modulator will sound. Now let's say you have a middle offset, and then you can put in the tremolo LFO, which will sway the offset a little bit and kind of change the dynamics between the OSC and the input signal. It gets really, really interesting. Once you try it out, you'll see what I'm talking about. So it's going from the tremolos, and then it's being remodulated. So one input, of course, is the tremolo of the input, and one input of the ring modulator is the tremolo of the ring OSC. And then it's going to the static crossfader like you saw in the previous patch, with the leftmost section being the sound that is coming out of the input tremolo by itself, and then the rightmost section will be the sound coming out of the tremolo of the ring mod OSC by itself, and anything in the middle will be a mix of the two. Then it's going into distortion, the same kind of pulsifier distortion as the previous patch, and then you have high pass and bypass and low pass and bypass. So same as the previous patch, but we added low pass in addition to the high pass. So you can kind of use it just to skim a little bit off the top or off the bottom, or you can actually set up a sort of like a bypass, a band pass, I mean. Sort of like a section where the sound passes, in the middle if you want to. Just an idea, guys. So this is the Ringer Craze, and it is pretty crazy. A lot of potential over here for pretty crazy sounds. It comes with a bunch of presets as well. Of course, you can use it as a tremolo only, so it's basically a tremolo as well as a ring modulator. Pretty cool. Check the presets out. So that's for the ring modulators. And then we also have two more patches, which are the talkbox and the small talk. And these kind of are meant to be used with simple synths that output a strong, oscillator sound, preferably that can be filtered and kind of swept in a way. Really good shapes to input into this thing is, sources that come from a saw or from a square wave. They have good harmonics to be used with these talk patches. So what they kind of do is they kind of give a vowel-like quality to sounds, and they both make use of the sonic core vowel filter that comes with Modular 4. But they kind of add a few more spices around it. Okay, so let's take a look at the small talk, the smaller one of the two, and then some of the stuff we already saw in the other patches. Pre-high pass and bypass, you can decide if you actually want to use like a bass sound, or you can take a little bit off the low end and to use it to make more narrower sort of sounds. Pre-distortion, especially useful if you're taking away off the low end and you're left with a narrower sound. You can give it some more bite by just increasing this distortion knob over here. Then it's going into a decimator. You can or you don't. Obviously, you can or you cannot use it, but it provides a lot of, it kind of provides more harmonics for the vocal filter to play with, and it actually plays really nice with the vocal filter, the decimator. So really adds a quality to it's kind of a way to enhance what this does. So try it out. This is a nice combination. And the decimator, everything, I guess, everything that can be modulated, you can see has dedicated LFOs. I'll talk about the LFOs in a minute because there's something interesting about this one. So the decimator can be modulated, the sample rate. You can make really long sweeps. Let's say you set it on the lowest possible here, 0, 0, 1, and on a sine, and then open it up a little bit, and you have a sort of running acid line. Then slowly the frequency will sway really slowly back and forth, and you'll have a really, really cool swaying sort of thing. So this is just one idea what to do with this modulation of the decimator, but you can do obviously a lot of other stuff. And then it goes into the vocal filter itself, where you have different parameters for setting vowels and all the bass parameters. What's interesting is the modulation section over down here. So as you can see, all of them are connected. You have dedicated LFOs for the two vowel modulators. And these come from this patch over here. As you can see, it's an interesting LFO. The first input is connected to just normal output as seen, output rate as written here or as indicated by the external frequency divider. And then the second LFO is a multiplication of the first LFO. What's interesting is it can be out of phase from the first LFO as well. And you have a choice for the LFO to be sine-based or triangle-based. It's a pretty interesting combination. If you add, let's say, a little bit from this one, and then you have this one multiplied a few times, and add this as well, it creates a pretty interesting interaction. Now the filter will also respond to key follow, and this will of course only work if you input MIDI into this patch. And then you can, for example, use the same MIDI that you use for the signal that you're inputting, for the synth that you're inputting to the vocal filter. You can use the same MIDI line, for example, and give the same MIDI to this patch, and then the key follow will follow the melody as played on the original synth, which is also a pretty interesting effect. Of course, you can also input a totally different MIDI line and get crazy and do whatever you want. The FM, which is like basically the bass cutoff point of the vocal filter, is also modulatable by its own Freq sweep LFO. So this is for the actual valve setting itself. Afterwards, it's going again. This is a little bit kind of just extra, right? So you have post distortion. The valve filter kind of tends to maybe quiet down and thin the sound a little bit. And you can kind of compensate for that right away by giving it some of these, some punch from this pulsifier module over here. And you have some post decimator as well. So it's no longer, of course, interacting. It's not what's going into the vocal filter. But if you want to get raspy, you have another decimator here on the output. And again, it's modulatable. So you can modulate one decimator one way and one decimator the other way. They each have their own LFO. Again, just another creative tool to get interesting, and of course it's going into the output, and you get presets and everything, etc., etc. So this is the small talk. Now let's get into the big talk box. It's the same basic idea. As you can see, it has the same kind of chain in the beginning, high pass, pulsifier distortion, decimator, everything that we already talked about. Going into the vocal filter, again, everything we already talked about. This time, instead of having that LFO with the multiplier, the two vowel modulation inputs have dedicated LFOs. So you can, have one doing one thing and one doing another thing, and they kind of result in a whatever kind of back and forth and moving around sway that you want. The LFOs themselves, interesting to mention, is they're also modulatable themselves. You have here two mod LFOs on the top, and they're each modulating the two modulation inputs on the LFO themselves. Now everything can be synced to external frequency and retriggered, whichever way you want to play it, right? So up until here, kind of similar to the previous batch. And then it's going into a dry signal tremolo. Okay. So, for the tremolo, so it's kind of taking the idea that you saw in the ring modulator patch a little bit. You have two tremolos. The dry signal tremolo, it takes the dry signal before the filter, dry as in after the input distortion. Okay, that's why it's labeled here input. So everything after here is going into the dry signal tremolo module, and then everything from here up to and including the vocal filter is going into the decimator vocal signal tremolo. So you can, and each of them can be modulated by their own LFO. It's really interesting. And so you can kind of mix around between the original signal and the vocal signal if you want. Okay, you have a dry wet mix over here on the bottom. You can actually set, for example, if you don't want to use tremolo at all, you can set the offset all the way to the top over here, so then there will be no tremolo involved with the filtered signal. it'll just be at full strength, whatever's coming out of the vocal filter, and you can set the mix all the way to the right, and then have your just straight up, you know, the vocal filter sound if you want. It's going into post distortion, which is a pulsifier module, the same as the input distortion, and then it's going into a soft fallback, which kind of allows you to go really crazy with the post distortion, or in general with the whole patch. It can get really loud and crazy because the soft fallback will kind of tame it a little bit at the final stage and help prevent clipping and kind of get your sound under control, even if it's really, really violent. So you can set up a really gnarly kind of vocal filter sound and give it a lot of punch and a lot of body using the distortions, with the soft foldback taming it back a little bit. Just a way to get that dirty, to get that strong sound, but still be able to actually use it, you know. So soft fallback, and then you have the post high pass, post everything. This is the last thing: high pass and bypass. So you can high pass the whole lot of this. We could have actually maybe put the high pass before the foldback. I don't know. It works this way as well. So the last thing is as we decided to do it, the post everything high pass, and you can just bypass it if you don't want to use it. And then it outputs the same as the other patches, as you already saw, to a multi-effect slot. You can use it or not use it. We talked about this before. And just to show that this also comes with with some presets as well to get you started. There's a lot of potential here, and of course a lot of potential with the other patches. So check these out. Hope you have fun with them, and I hope you get some really crazy sounds and some crazy ideas for your own modular patches as well from these. So have a good one. See you in other videos.